This podcast episode was originally recorded for Mormon Sex Info and is being refurbished for your enjoyment.
Mormon Mental Health Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on mormonmentalhealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening.
Hi, this is Lisa Butterworth for the Mormon Sex Info podcast. And today, my guest, I just realized I might need to start over because I didn't ask how to pronounce your name. It's Kersti.
So it's Kersti, like Care Bear.
Uh-huh.
And then Spjut, like cute.
Oh, Spjut.
Yes.
Kersti.
Yes.
Okay. I assumed it was Kersti because that's how
That's a fair assumption. Some people do pronounce it that way. So.
Yeah, Kersti Spjut.
Yeah.
Spjut. Ah, Spjut. So, Kersti, tell us about yourself.
So like I said, my name is Kersti Spjut. I am a clinical psychologist practicing in Utah. By day, I'm a college professor, and by night, I have a small private practice that's just me. And I'm from Southern California originally. I went to school in New Hampshire for my undergrad, and then I went on a mission to Canada where I learned Mandarin Chinese, which was really fun.
Cool.
And came to BYU for grad school and have just sort of set up camp here. So that's where I live and practice now.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your topic today.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk today to parents, specifically to LDS parents of LGBTQ youth. It's sort of a specific population, but it's one that I have a lot of experience working with clinically, and that I think is really looking for some support and guidance, because there's not like a guidebook when your kid comes out like, now what do I do, right? So that's what I'd like to talk about today.
Wonderful. So you provided me with, and as I read through them, I recognized these questions as well. A list of questions that are really common for parents to ask when they bring their kids in and they're wondering like, oh, well, what do I do? So I will just throw out some of these questions for you and we can have a conversation about them.
Awesome.
So the first question is, what if this is just a phase?
Yes. And this is such a common question. I think it comes from a place of love and from trying to understand something that's often new to you as a parent. It also comes from a place of maybe hoping that you won't have to deal with something that feels unfamiliar or tough. It would be nice for you as the parent if it was a phase, if you didn't have to wrestle with the complexities of what LGBTQ identity for your child means for their life, for their religious affiliation, for their place in your family. And the answer is it's probably not a phase. And that may take some time to sink in. But for the sake of argument, right, let's just say that it was a phase, right? I'm sure in the history of the world, there have been at least one or two youth who have maybe claimed an LGBTQ identity and then afterwards said, oh, no, maybe that doesn't fit as well. So let's say it was a phase, right? Think about other phases that your child has gone through and how you've reacted and what message that gave to them, right? I'm sure there have been other, interests or habits or friend groups or styles of dressing or other things that maybe haven't made sense to you, that haven't fully fit with how you maybe pictured your kid and their life going. But when you disapprove of those things, did they lose interest? Did they say, oh, maybe Minecraft isn't that cool because my mom's bored of listening to me talk about Minecraft, right? No, they don't lose interest. Sometimes they gain interest, but more importantly, the message they get is, oh, this is something I can't talk about with my parents. That's it. And so they, instead of changing their interest in it, it makes them more likely to hide. It makes them more likely to share it with other parts of their life that are affirming, but not with you, right? And so you close off part of the relationship when I'm guessing most parents want an open relationship. They want to be connected to their child. They want to know what's happening for them and to be able to give advice and to share and to give comfort when things are hard. So even if your child is one of the very few kids for whom it is a phase, learning to accept and even celebrate their identity is going to go a really, really long way. And maybe I'll use this as a place to talk about my favorite resource for parents who are not sure where to go when their kid comes out. And that's something called the Family Acceptance Project. We can put a link to this in the show notes, but
woot woot.
Yes, it's so good. I'll give you my Reader's Digest version, but definitely go check out the website. They have videos, they have pamphlets you can download, they have lots of really cool stuff. But the basic idea, this is a research project out of San Francisco State University, where they surveyed a huge range of families across the state of California. So they really tried to get a diverse sample, people in rural and urban areas, people with conservative religions and no religions, people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, different poverty levels, socioeconomic status. And they started with a qualitative interview. So just letting youth who are LGBT talk about their experiences in their family, and just a free form interview. And then they, from those interviews, found a bunch of common themes or behaviors about how their families treated them. And so then they made really structured surveys, like checklists, and they gave those to families and said, okay, check this box if you've ever done these things or if you ever experienced these things. And then they analyzed all of that data and found a really concrete set of accepting behaviors and rejecting behaviors. And they also found a really strong link between these behaviors and really specific outcomes, especially mental health outcomes for the youth. So I'll give you a couple examples. So in families that practiced a high number of rejecting behaviors, their children, their LGBT youth, were more than 8 times as likely to attempt suicide as families with a low level or no rejecting behaviors. Right? They were more than 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, 3 times as likely to be at high risk for HIV and other STIs. So, and the stats go on and on. So a lot of times we hear stats about, oh, gay youth are more likely to attempt suicide, but we're missing this piece that it's not anything about being gay, it's about how accepting or rejecting their immediate environment is. And that starts in the home, that starts with the family. And really interestingly, they found a sort of dose response effect. So the more rejecting behaviors, the more likely the negative outcomes, the fewer likely. So even in families with just moderate rejection, so they're still being somewhat rejecting, but not extreme rejection, the risk of suicide goes down to twice as likely instead of 8 times as likely. So even if you can just shift a half of an inch in your ability to accept your child or to let go of some rejecting behaviors, that still makes a difference. That still matters.
That is some really powerful research, I think. I know that when I first read it, it made it so clear, because you do hear so much about the bad outcomes for LGBTQ youth, and it's terrifying as a parent. You can feel really scared for your child, and to know that you personally have that kind of power over the outcome is really empowering, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's why this question about is it a phase, why it comes up so much, because a lot of the stuff we hear in the media about LGBTQ youth is focusing on these negative outcomes. And it's like you said, it's really empowering for parents to be like, oh, I can do something about this. they're wishing it's a phase because they see a dark, dreary future for the child. But learning this research, like really good evidence is saying, oh, they could have a beautiful, wonderful life. This doesn't have to be a death sentence. This can be something that maybe eventually could even be celebrated in your family. It's just another thing that I know about my child now, and I'm just so interested in all the parts of them.
So this, leads interestingly into the next question that we hear often is, won't I make it worse by accepting it?
Yeah. And there, again, it goes with this fear of, seeing an LGBTQ identity as being something really scary and dark. So that's implicit in the question, like, will I make it worse? Right. And the truth is the opposite, right? Accepting your child, unconditional love doesn't make anything worse, right? It builds closeness, it builds intimacy in your relationship. So when there are tricky situations that come up for them later in life, or even right now, they know they can come to you and they can share with you, and you can have some input in their life, or at least some love and some comfort for them. So you won't make it worse by accepting it. You'll make your relationship closer, right? And think about how you want to be with your child 5, 10, 15 years from now, and choose your words and your actions now with that long-term framework in mind.
So this isn't the way that I feel like my clients ask the question, but, as you were talking, one of the things that came up for me is I feel like there is, like beyond the sense of won't it make it worse, like the assumption is that we're talking about the outcome for the child, but I think that there is another hard question in there that is about more like what God wants for your child, right? Like
Yes.
there is this sense of like, what, like, am I letting my child choose something that God would disapprove of, or that my neighbors would disapprove of? And how to reconcile that with that same question of will I make it worse, right? Like if I know that being accepting will bring a better outcome for my child, I still have this fear about what the neighbors will think or what God will think.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up a really good point, Lisa, which is how to reconcile this with theology. And that is far beyond my pay grade. But the way I approach this with my clients is I'm a mental health professional. So my duty is to provide you with accurate mental health information so that you can make choices for your family. And there's a values piece, there's a religious belief piece of this that really is up to parents. That's something for them to wrestle with, to pray about, to think about, to study about. But as my mission president always said, information fuels inspiration. It was his attempt to get us to tell him more about what was going on in our area, so he knew who to transfer. But I think it's really true. The more accurate information we have, the better our prayers and our soul searching can go, because we're basing it on truth, and truth is just truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based information. I don't know how that's going to fit with your personal religious beliefs, with your family's needs, but I know that it's better to know the risks, to know the benefits, and then leave that soul searching and that religious piece to you, to your faith leaders, to whoever you consult with around those issues.
Absolutely. And, like professionally, that's definitely the way I approach it with parents as well. Yeah. And like on a personal level, since I'm not in a professional setting, but I'm doing a podcast right now, one of the ways that this really like hit home for me was, because this was talking about acceptance and rejection and sort of the ways that unconditional love create connection. And I remember having this moment when I realized that in our theology, it's really centered around connection, like the idea of being in the celestial kingdom with your family is about being connected eternally with the people you love the most. And it really made sense to me that things that create connection would be things that God would approve of. And I know that maybe sounds a little bit silly, but like if we're creating connections that we want to last forever, then that seems like that is in line with our theology to me, right? That really made sense for me when I was personally trying to reconcile the inherent paradoxes that we face in this.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many parents have looked at me with tears in their eyes after learning this information and saying, oh, that's what love means. That's how I love my kid. Like, I believe in love. I believe that it's a commandment to love everyone and to love my child. And I didn't really know how, right? This is the how to, on boots on the ground, of this really, really deeply held belief, which is that families are forever, or that we want to create the type of families that would want to be forever. Not all families would want that because it's not a safe place. And so creating that safety and that connection, like you're talking about, is so important.
Right. That's even something I hear sort of in the ex-Mormon community quite often, is like, why would I want to be forever with those people? You know, like,
for sure. Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that we have to think about, of like, if we're really going to create a place where, you know, like we feel safe together and we want to draw into forever family, then here's a tool that tells us exactly how to make that happen. So one of the next questions that we hear a lot from parents are they just saying that they're gay, trans, queer, or however they identify because everyone in their friend group is saying the same thing, or because they saw something about it on the internet?
Yes, this is such a good question, and one that I get often. Parents, you know, with younger kids, you have a little more idea of what's going on in their inner world because they just externalize everything. They'll tell you when they're mad and when they're sad. As kids get older, and so sort of pre-adolescence, adolescence, a lot more gets internalized. They have a much richer inner world, and parents don't always have access to that. And so they're you know, making their best guess and assumption about how their kid is feeling or doing, or how they identify. And then they see their kid start hanging out with a friend group with other kids who identify as gay or bisexual or what have you. And then the kid comes out and the parent says, oh, this is just peer pressure. This is just peer influence. And going back to the first one, is it just a phase? It's probably not, right? There's some degree of sexual fluidity, meaning sexuality and gender identity isn't necessarily like a fixed construct that stays exactly the same your whole lifespan in every situation. But the research on sexual fluidity suggests it's not really in our conscious control. It's not something that we're choosing necessarily, even if it shifts over time. More commonly, what we see is youth who will tell me as their therapist, no, I've known this for years, and I finally found a group of friends who made me not feel crazy. And like, oh, wow, you feel this way too? I thought I was the only one. Now I feel empowered. Now I feel like I'm not a freak or I'm not broken. So I'm able to start accepting my own identity and start coming out about it. So it might be like a mixed causality, right? They were drawn to that friend group because they related to them to begin with, not necessarily that, you know, the friend group induced or caused this in your child in some way.
I love the complexity of the way that you talk about sexual fluidity, because it is such a complicated question, right? And I think that there was a time, especially in the like 90s and early aughts, when we were wanting to, you know, say that either sex, you know, like either that our sexuality was something that you either chose it or you were born with it, or, you know, like it was a very sort of black and white kind of question, and the research as usual is coming out with a much more complex story. But I love just recognizing that, you know, regardless of, you know, these complexities, it isn't something that we necessarily can consciously choose or unchoose.
Absolutely. There's a really great TED Talk by Lisa Diamond. I mean, she's the like, you know, spearhead figure for understanding sexual fluidity. She literally wrote the book on it. But there's a TED Talk, I think it's something about the title, something to do with Born This Way. And she goes through, you know, this argument about whether or not people with diverse gender and sexual identities are quote unquote born this way, and the pros and cons of that argument. I think it's a really interesting thing to listen to. Like you said, it's just so complex and so nuanced. Something else that sometimes troubles parents is a child might come out first with one identity because the other identity either feels inaccessible to them, like they're not sure that they have that yet, or they're afraid it feels more stigmatized to them. So an example is youth who come out first as gay and later as trans. And that can be tough for parents who are, for the parents' perspective, they feel like they're struggling to keep up. Like, how do I talk about my child? How do I refer to them? Are they just making it up as they go along? The answer is no. And sort of yes, but not making it up in the sense of creating something out of nothing, but they're figuring out who they are. That's one of the primary tasks of adolescence is individuation, whether it's with sexuality and gender or any number of other parts of identity, personality, interests, career goals, religious faith beliefs. All of those things are the tasks of adolescent development. So if it feels like a moving target, it's because it is. And that's sort of the whole point.
Oh gosh, why do we make it so hard?
I don't know.
Well, it just is, right? Like, So one of the questions then that comes along with that same thing is, did X, Y, or Z make my kid gay?
Yeah. And my answer to this is always, I don't know, and probably not. But even if it did, accepting your child exactly as they are is one of the most powerful and loving acts you can do for them. We like to find causes for things. Heck, research is trying to figure out all of the causes too, and we have some insight. We know there's some link to prenatal hormonal environments, how many kids of which gender were born to a certain uterus, and different genetic links. There are some things we're figuring out, but there's still a lot that's unknown. And even those studies are generalized statistics, not about your specific child. I think the question behind this question is, why is this happening? And can it be changed? And the why is this happening, that gets more into your values and beliefs. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that for you. But we can, therapy is a good space to dig into that. And what does this mean to you? And what are the fears you have? And what are the joys you have? And as far as the question of can this be changed, hopefully that's clear by now. No. Therapies that will presume to change someone's sexual identity, gender identity, they're not only ineffective, but they're actively harmful, and they're illegal on minors in not enough states, but plenty of states, and should be illegal everywhere. But those are things called conversion therapies, or there's other terms for them as well. But did this thing make your kid gay, right? Maybe early childhood sexual abuse. That's a common question. There's plenty of people who experience sexual abuse who don't have a minority sexual orientation. So it's not a one-to-one correlation. And even if there's links between certain early experiences and later LGBTQ identity, again, the causality, the direction of the causality isn't 100% clear. Sometimes kids are targeted because maybe they're presenting themselves in a way that's atypical for their gender. They're an easy target for teasing, for bullying, and unfortunately also for abuse. So, sometimes I'll have parents think back, remember when your kid was just discovering the world and you had all these firsts, right? There was just this magic in the first word that they said, the first food they ate, the first steps that they took. And I would invite you to consider that understanding your child's gender and sexual identity is just as worth celebrating as every other milestone. It's getting to know just another corner of this entire universe that they contain within them. And that's really special. If you're lucky enough to have them share that with you, maybe it's a stretch from where you are right now, and that's okay. But if you can inch in that direction of just starting where you are and working towards a place of maybe neutrality or acceptance, and eventually, maybe even celebration, knowing that they're worth loving, they're worth embracing and celebrating every inch of their little inner world.
I love that framing. I got some chills. I loved it. And I was actually wondering, because I do have so many clients who are still wrestling with this identity piece in their 30s and 40s and 50s because they didn't have that opportunity to do so when they were in their teens. And I don't know, the same thing that you were saying about, the same thing applies often, is like, did this make me gay, or did that make me gay? And also just that discovery of like that transition between, like, maybe I identified for bi for a long time because that felt more safe to my partner, to my spouse. And now I'm realizing that I'm not bi, that I really am gay, or, like so many of these things apply throughout the lifespan and not just to adolescence. And it makes me curious what it would look like for older people to be able to see that this awakening through the eyes of celebrating who they are and finding joy in like discovery of their innermost experiences. I don't know. I just loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the shift of thinking of it as something magical or exciting or worth celebrating, it feels sort of radical sometimes, given all of the doom and gloom that we hear about statistics with LGBT youth and adults. And I kind of like that. I kind of like being a little radical when it comes to things like how to love people.
Absolutely. Well, Jesus was super radical.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next question that a lot of parents ask is, should I make them go to church?
Yeah, so this question, my answer is it depends. This is going to be a really personal decision for you, for your family. I can't make the decision for you, but here are a few things to consider and have them go through some of these questions. So first is, have you asked and genuinely listened to your child about what they want to do with church and why? Do they feel understood by you? Whatever you ultimately end up, whatever boundaries or guidelines you set in your household for church attendance, if they've been set without your child feeling heard and understood and included in that process, they're not going to be received very well. Similarly, have you considered your own reasons for why you want them to go to church? What's driving the desire? Is it about love? Is it about fear? Is it about judgment? Is it some combination? And are there ways to reach your objective that look different from what you expected? So, a lot of parents, the reason they want their kid to go to church is because church is a good place for the parent. It's a place they look forward to going. It gives them inspiration. It gives them guidance. It gives them a sense of community and connection. And they want that for their kid, right? So it's coming from a place of love. Sometimes it might be from a place of fear. What will people think if you don't come? Maybe the parents and church leadership, and they feel it looks a certain way to not have their whole family at church with them. They're trying to portray some sort of image. It's hard, but it's good to be honest with yourself about that as part of your motivation, and being able to say, that's not your kid's job to make you look the way you want to look. Their job is to be a human being who's trying their best, right? And your job is to love them. But thinking about creative solutions, reasonable accommodations, like I think about, recently I was reading that verse in D&C about the spirit of revelation, and it references Moses crossing the Red Sea. And I was thinking, gosh, I would never think to come to a body of water and to ask God, hey, could you just move the water for me? Can we just get it out of the way? I would probably be thinking, can we get around it? Is there a boat? Is there a log I can float on, right? But so sometimes we need to seek creative out of the box solutions, things that we might haven't considered before. So some compromises that clients of mine have come to is, are you willing to let your child show up as themselves at church, in the way they dress, in the way they present themselves? Because if you're setting limits on, well, you have to wear a dress or you can't wear a dress in order to go to this place, well, why would they want to go somewhere where they don't feel authentic, where they don't feel like they can be themselves, right? So maybe compromises on what you think is church appropriate attire, right? Do you stand up for them when they experience discrimination at church, right? Do you advocate for them? Are you actively working to make your ward a safe space for them, right? If you're not, And if that's one of their concerns, then maybe there's something you could do to make it safer, right? Could they attend part of the meeting? So for a lot of trans and genderqueer youth, church segregates by gender during part of the meeting block, right? There's a time where you have to choose to go to the boys' class or the girls' class. And that can be really distressing and uncomfortable for a lot of these youth. So being able to say, for some youth, they say, hey, I'm fine with sacrament meeting and Sunday school. Don't make me go to young women's. And if, maybe that's an arrangement that you're flexible and comfortable with. And also just doing like trial and error. Say, hey, what if we try this for a month? And then let's check in. I want to know how you're feeling. Like, you feeling loved, you feeling accepted is really important to me. And, you having these principles in your life is also important to me. I believe in faith. I believe in repentance. And as your parent, I'm allowed to share my faith with you, and trying to figure out, the older the child is, the more flexibility I would give, right? As they're getting a clearer sense of their identity. But it will vary quite a bit based on your family, your ward, your personality, their personality. One of my colleagues I like, he has this phrase where he says, religion is really good for your mental health when it's a get to instead of a have to. So there's good research that being in a faith community can be really helpful for mental health, but as soon as it's forced on someone, and especially when it's accompanied with rejecting beliefs and behaviors by your fellow congregants, then it really negatively impacts mental health.
I love that. I love that framing of when it's a get to instead of a have to.
Yeah.
It also, goes along well with one of our really strong Mormon values of agency, right? Like, yeah, it needs to be a choice that people make. Otherwise it feels oppressive and it's not a choice anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, do you want church to be associated with force and coercion and shame and all of these things? You like it as a parent because it's not associated with those things for you. And if your child has the right to self-determine with their religious affiliation. But if there is going to be a place for them in the church someday, if that's your hope, then forcing it on them now against their will and without listening to their thoughts and feelings about it, probably not the best approach.
And I definitely see like these outcomes. I don't work with youth as much. I work with older people more. Occasionally I work with youth, but the adults that I work with who, go through different faith transitions are the ones where they were really forced to do things and they didn't feel like they had a choice, are the ones that do struggle more with their mental health and struggle with their relationship with the church. And clients that I have, even, pretty strongly LGBTQ clients who were given choices, generally have a much better relationship with their family and the church, and specifically the church, when they weren't forced to interact with it in ways that they didn't want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the next question that a lot of parents want to know, I can't let them wear those clothes to school. What if they get bullied?
And this can, this clothes is one example. It can apply to any manner of gender expression or ways of expressing themselves. There's a fear they'll get teased, right? A lot of parents have had experiences themselves in their primary school years saying, I got bullied for this. I got beat up for this. I don't want that to happen to my kid. Again, it's coming absolutely from a place of love. Who wants their kid to get bullied, right? No, hopefully nobody. But the implication in this question is, that they will definitely get bullied, and B, that it's worse to be bullied by random peers than it is to be rejected by your own parents. Right? Kids are way more resilient than we sometimes believe, right? Bullying sucks. I wish it didn't happen. Anti-LGBTQ discrimination sucks. Absolutely. I wish it didn't happen. But the wounds that last the longest come from those we love the most, right? In the home, having parents, not defend you and the way you want to express yourself and say, hey, it's more important that your peers think you're okay as something you're not than that I think you're okay as something that you are or that you feel like you are. I say feel like you are because for some parents, it's hard to fully accept how the child is describing themselves. And so saying, okay, well, let's take it from the kid's perspective. Even if you don't believe they have this identity, they do, and see it from their perspective. What's it like to be rejected by your own parents, right? That's the more common way to get wounded for life rather than, bullying and teasing from peers, which again, not to minimize that, but I'd rather have peers do it than me.
Yeah. And it's not just peers, like adults can bully your children as well.
Oh, totally. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why in that family acceptance project, on those list of accepting behaviors, one of them is standing up for your child when they're discriminated against. That's something you can do as a parent that helps them, that protects them, that gives them unconditional love.
Yeah. One of the ways that I would frame this for my own children was to, like give them information and choices is the way I talk about it, right? Like I would say, if you choose to wear this outfit, here are the ways that I think some of the people in this context might, like my family or the people at church or the people at the piano recital. Here are things that they might say or do. I don't know that they will, but if they do, I want you to know that I will stand up for you. I will protect you. And it's also okay because my kids are a little less like they're kind of pleasers, right? Like they're not really interested in not, and so, I would just say, I'll stand up for you if that's what you want to wear. And if you want, if you want to wear something that will maybe invite fewer comments, that's okay too. And I will stand up for you in that as well. Like, it's not wrong for you to choose, because sometimes, like people can feel like, well, if I don't dress the way that is in line with my gender identity, then I'm betraying myself or I'm giving in to, and but if you don't feel safe and you'd rather just fit in, that's okay too, right? Like whatever it is that you want, I will support you. But like if you decide that it's okay and you want to wear something that will invite comment, I will support you. If you would rather just dress in a way that will blend in, I will support you. And then that way it's giving my children information about potential consequences and giving them a choice, but also affirming that I will support them in whatever they choose.
I love that framing, like information and empowerment. Like, here's the accurate information. Now you choose, and you know that I'm a safe base no matter what you choose. I love it too because it gives them the freedom to change their mind. It gives them the freedom to experiment and say, okay, I'm going to try this for a couple of days and then maybe I'll try that. And that's how kids figure out who they are, is by having a safe, there's some boundaries around it. Like, you're not opening up to abuse or saying that this, like there are some limits on what's okay, but within those safe boundaries, they can experiment and play. And I love that.
Yeah. Like if we're going to a piano recital, you can't wear a bikini. Not that my kids ever wanted to.
Yeah.
You still need to look dressed up, but you can dress up with a tie or you can dress up with a dress. Either way is fine. Yeah. But you decide what risks you want to take, what message you want to send, and I am there. I have your back. But here's how I think people, might respond. Here's what information I have. So another question that a lot of parents struggle with is this sort of regret that they have of like, I didn't react well when they came out. And looking back on it, I realized that. So now what do I do?
Yeah. And this is, just so much love and empathy for parents, right? Nobody teaches us how to do this, right? Unless you seek out that information and education. And so what I would say about this and about anything in parenting is just repair, right? There's always space and time for repair work. Saying, I was wrong. I messed up. I'm so sorry. I acted from a place of fear, owning your part and letting them know they don't have to comfort you and be like, it's okay, right? Teaching them this is just good in general. When someone apologizes, if you feel like it's okay, you can say it's okay, but you can also just say thank you, right? Thank you for this apology, right? It was wrong what you did, and I really appreciate you owning it. So owning the harm, asking genuine questions. What was that like for you? I want you to know I can take feedback. I can take hard stuff. I want to know what that really was like for you. What do you need from me? How can I support you? Another thing that I think is so important for parents is there's this theory called the ring theory of grief, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I love it. I always draw this picture for parents and help them try and figure out what their circles would be. But the idea is at the center of any crisis or trauma or tragedy, which I want to be clear, I don't think a youth having an LGBTQ identity is a crisis or a tragedy, but I know it can be experienced that way for an LDS parent or for a parent who maybe doesn't understand or has a lot of these fears and misinformation. So at the center of this circle is your child, right? And then outward, imagine a series of concentric circles that are being drawn, and it's the people closest to your child. So the first circle is maybe immediate family, right? Next circle is friends in the neighborhood or community group, your ward, maybe just moving out into your city, your country, your world community. And the catchphrase for this ring theory is comfort in, dump out. So wherever your place is in the series of concentric circles, as you move towards the center of the circle, you send comfort. So if you're the parent with your child in the center, you're sending comfort, unconditional love, acceptance, affirmation to the center. And then dump out means you look to the circles outside of you and you find a place to process your big feelings, because it's okay to have big feelings about this. It's really helpful to find your own therapy. There's lots of support groups for parents of LGBT kids. In the Utah area, there's the Encircle House. There's a lot of local LGBTQ resource centers. There's online support groups. There's Facebook groups. There's PFLAG, lots of resources that I can share in the show notes. But you need a place where you can dump out, where you can vent, where you can cry, where you can say, this is really hard for me, or here's my fears, or here's my shame about how I treated my child, and what do I do from here? That's an important part of your journey. And that's something you do not put on your kid. You don't put those big feelings on them, because what are they going to do, right? They're going to try and make themselves smaller. They're going to blame themselves for your pain. They're going to feel like it's not safe to just be who they are with you. And at the same time, you deserve support. You deserve a place where you can figure out what this means and how to adjust your vision for your kid's future. There's a lot of parents express a sense of grief, like it's grieving the child I thought I had in order to accept the child that I do have. And it's okay to need to go through that process. You're human. Whatever you feel is valid. You just need to learn how to direct it in a way that's helpful and not harmful. So comfort in, dump out.
Absolutely. I love the ring theory. I use it all the time.
That's a good one for sure.
Yeah. And I love the recommendation for therapy, because it really is very, very difficult to ask that question of your child of like, how was that? How did you experience that when you know that it was something that you were responsible for, right? Like, one of our most cherished, I think, possessions as a parent is like our vision of ourselves as like a good parent, a good mother, or a good father. And like, when we make big mistakes, and we all do, like that idea of ourselves gets really challenged and sitting in, usually it's shame, but also guilt of recognizing that we hurt our children in ways that, just it's painful to challenge that and to sit in that. And, if you don't have a good network of friends that you can dump out to, therapy is really, really important.
Yeah. And I think, another thought I'm having is the importance of educating yourself as a parent. I have a list of websites and books that I find helpful. Part of your education will be listening to your kid, and part of it will be doing some of your own homework and learning the vocabulary and looking at the research and watching, the videos on the Family Acceptance Project website, and, reading some books about other parents' experiences. That also goes a long way, just a little bit of education and familiarizing yourself so that your kid doesn't have to have the burden of teaching you every tiny little thing about the LGBTQ community.
I mean, nobody can keep up with all of the vocabulary. Yeah. And so another piece of that is like trying to keep up, spending some time reading the books and learning the things, but also, like having grace for yourself and just being able, you don't want to expect your child to educate you, but at the same time, like if your child says something that you don't recognize, you can say, oh, I don't know what that is. Where can I learn more? Or, just being open to, that can be really hard as a parent to feel like your child knows more than you do about something, or to be in the position of learning from them instead of teaching them. That can be really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of giving grace. You don't have to be perfect at this. And I hope the message people take away from this conversation is not that you suck or that you're failing as a parent. It's just that you matter as a parent, and that's empowering. Start with the tiniest baby step that you feel comfortable with and take it, and then see where you're at. And then maybe take another tiny baby step. You don't have to quit your religion. You don't have to completely upend your life. Maybe for some people they do, and that's helpful for them. But I would say for a lot of people, it starts with a series of just inching towards repair attempts. Oh, I'm sorry I said that. Inching towards understanding, having grace with yourself, having grace with your kid, just working it out together.
Yeah, and I think that what you just touched on is a big fear for a lot of people, that like, if I show this acceptance toward my child, will I lose my religion? Will I lose my community? Will I lose my relationship with God, right? Like there's this big fear that you will lose everything if you move toward acceptance. And it certainly doesn't have to be that way. Like for some people, it does turn out that way. But I think because as someone who works with a lot of sort of mixed faith marriages where one partner is in and one partner is out, I think that faith in some ways is also not something that's under our conscious control, right? Like people, I've never really had a client say, yes, I chose to lose my faith, or I chose to have a faith transition. And I don't really feel like people who are in fact, I have members of a couple who's like, oh, it'd be just so much easier if I just didn't believe it and I could just leave with him. It would make the marriage so much easier. It would make him so happy. I wish I could do that, right? Like, but often these things aren't under our conscious control. And so, like learning some radical acceptance around that as well, that like you don't have to, it's not an inevitable, slippery slope that if you accept your LGBTQ child that you're going to leave the church and lose your community and lose your relationship with God. Like it certainly doesn't happen that way, but that is a fear that I think a lot of parents have.
Absolutely. I love how you put that. It's definitely a fear, and fears are worth sitting with and wrestling with and planning for sometimes, or just making space for in other times. And I'm like you, I've seen lots of folks for whom staying in the church has really worked. And I've seen lots of youth who, have no plans on staying in the church forever, but whose families do. And because their families are so accepting and affirming and are able to really use these principles, the youth is totally cool with that. They feel loved, they feel accepted, even with kind of like the mixed faith marriage. You don't have to see things exactly the same way to regularly do actions that build love and connection.
Right. And that has better outcomes in marriage. It has better outcomes from LGBT kids, right? Like
for sure.
When a couple can love each other across the divide. And in fact, that is, I feel like in some ways, a maturing of love, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we can only love the people who are in the same place as us, that love is not as, it doesn't feel as secure, it doesn't feel as deep, it doesn't feel as safe as the love that can defy the boundaries.
I love that. That's so true.
Thank you so much for this podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun to talk about.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before we finish up?
Just wanting parents to know you matter, and wherever you're at is okay. And you can be okay where you're at and start taking steps in a direction that you want to go. So, and I also want to recognize, I see you. I see that what you're doing is out of love. Your intention is love. And now that you know the impact of certain behaviors, you can start to shift the way you direct that love, because I know your love for your kid is so boundless and so beautiful.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time today.
You bet.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me, unknown ways before me roll, hiding rock and treacherous show, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous waves, obey thy will, when thou sayest to them, be still. Wondrous sovereign of the sea, Jesus, Savior, pilot me. When at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and the peaceful rest, then while leaning on my breast, may I hear